Welcome once again to Forecast Lab, starting out your Wednesday evening edition, and we'll take a look at the surface map and see what's going on across the country. We've got a large amount of tropical air working northward through the I-35 corridor. If we take a look at the dew points, they're running from about 71 at DFW, 74 at Wichita, 74 at Omaha, and you can see they're running about 77 there at the Quad Cities and 74 at Des Moines. So we have plenty of moisture available, extending all the way back into central Nebraska and eastward into Indiana and Kentucky. North of that, we've got a frontal system, warm front there from south Chicago through the Minneapolis area, and then a cold front back towards South Dakota, where we have 104 at Pierre at this hour. And we are expecting severe weather this evening, developing across parts of Minnesota and far western Wisconsin, and there could be a strong likelihood of a derecho moving into the Lake Michigan area and then into Michigan and Indiana. And that means the derecho could affect Milwaukee, Chicago, and the western shores of Michigan. In the southwestern states, we still have the monsoon going on. A bit of a break right now, however, dew points are still up near 61 to 62 in the lower valleys of Arizona, and they've dried out to 47 and 51 at Mojave. Just a few days ago, they were up near 60 to 65. Some of that moisture has really infiltrated northward, though. We're seeing 50s dew points in Utah and even 62 in the Snake River Valley. And that moisture is expected to get richer as we head into the weekend. A cold incursion for the northeastern states, a very pleasant day up there with 73 at Albany and 84 at Pittsburgh. And in the southeastern states, a weak Bermuda high there. Not much of an extent into the southeastern states, but we do have tropical flow heading up into Louisiana and Texas. And I did identify this weak easterly wave moving through Louisiana. For Alaska and northwestern Canada, very strong system in the Chukchi Sea into Chukotka. That's that eastern part of Russia. And you can see the very strong but cold south to southwesterly flow through that region. The air out ahead of it, a little bit more mild. And then up along the Brooks Range, we've got this stationary front, very common this time of year. And then in eastern Canada, we've got this departing system, the warm sector covering part of Newfoundland with temperatures near 79, which is warmer than what we have at Boston with 74. So we're definitely looking at a pattern where things have cooled down a bit. You can see the strong cold air advection coming into the northern states. So that's a bit of a change. That cold air advection should be associated with some degree of troughing in the mid and upper levels. So why don't we take a look at the upper air chart? Yeah, it's been a while since we've seen this chart, but this kind of shows what we're dealing with. Large ridge across the central U.S., centered on, I would say, Denver. Now, there is troughing in the prairies, but it's very small scale. So this is going to be mostly associated with a shortwave trough, and that's kind of linked to that cold air advection coming into the Dakotas from Canada. The long-wave trough, which represents the bulk of the overall cold air advection over the past week or so, shows that deep long-wave troughing in the northeastern states where conditions are very cool this afternoon. And in the southern states, we've got that easterly flow. So that means storms are moving east to west. And somewhere in there, we may see some troughing associated with that easterly wave. But we can't really resolve that at this scale. The map does show a little bit of additional troughing in the Rio Grande Valley, that low pressure area right there, way off to the bottom of the map. Not really enough surface data to pick that out. But we do see some thunderstorm complexes in the lower Rio Grande Valley right there, and that could be associated with that upper air disturbance. very quiet on the NHC front, which is kind of surprising considering the time of year and how things have been over the past several years. And the 5-day outlook shows things to be pretty quiet. However, that's not the case at SPC. Moderate risk from far western Wisconsin all the way down into the Lake Michigan area, and it appears we already have a couple lines of storms, one right there and another possible one up there in northern Minnesota. So let's zoom down and see what's happening. Now, by the time you watch this, storms should be underway, but this will give you an idea of what the preliminary pre-storm environment looked like. And we see a lot of convective debris across Wisconsin and Minnesota. Not much of a low cloud field. Pretty clear out there in the warm sector. Down beneath, though, I don't know, I was seeing some transverse bands in here, but I think that may be in the mid-levels since it seems to be carried quickly to the east-southeast. It does look like we have some deep convection up to the north right here. Some of that could be the embryonic stage of that MCS. So as it moves towards the southeast, that could grow upscale. And another area we're watching is the front itself, some elevated showers going on in that area right now. There's a quick look at the mesoscale picture. And that's what I'm seeing for boundaries at the present time. So this is all going to be the warm, moist sector. The moisture axis, that'll probably run from this 77 in the southwestern part of the state and up towards St. Cloud, maybe a little west of there, right in there. I think that's going to be the moisture axis. So I would look for the best chances of development to be near the intersection of that moist axis with the warm front boundary, so maybe south of Duluth, maybe off to the southwest and north of St. Cloud. And as you can certainly guess, if storms do get going in this area, they're going to follow that warm front boundary as it lifts to the north. And this is all without looking at any models yet, so we can kind of get a sense of what's happening here and compare that to the high-resolution rapid refresh. And there's the lacrosse radar, not much to see at this time. The very rapid movement here suggests that this stuff is embedded in the mid-levels, and it's probably not doing very much. It should clear the area very quickly. So what we're watching is up to the north, quite a ways. And up there we certainly have storms. There's that complex there north of Duluth, a couple other cells, and that'll certainly be the deeper convection, and we'll have to see what happens as that moves into Wisconsin. As it interacts with that moisture coming up from the southwest, we could see expansion of that storm complex. And here's how it plays out on the high-resolution rapid refresh. That's going to be about the current time, and yeah, the initialization is okay. I think there's a little more convection than what the model is indicating. So then we look at the trends, and it doesn't look like a whole lot happening until around sunset. And then it goes for some explosive development there near the intersection with that warm front and the moist axis, because that will be shifting gradually to the east over the next several hours, and the warm front will lift to the north, maybe up into that area right there. So that's where that's happening. And that convective complex will propagate southeast. Let's take a look at some of these soundings ahead of the line, kind of sample the environment. And that's going to be western Wisconsin there. We see some very good turning of that low-level wind field. The hodograph, yeah, that's sweeping out a very large area. So the storm relative helicity is going to be quite elevated. SRH is 300 to 400, depending on which layer you select. The instability, yep, quite a bit of that with capes up near 2,500 to 3,000. T-capes, that's pretty important, especially this time of year in the northern plains. That's running near 1,000. So this complex will be putting out cold pools, and it will become a cold pool driven system. Although because of the shear being shown here, there may be initially some supercells in western Wisconsin. The Corfiti downshear vector indicating a very rapid movement towards the east-southeast at 70 knots. So a lot of the indicators here are pointing towards derecho potential. Now exactly where that's going to go is up in the air. There's some disagreement between the models, but we're looking at pretty much movement towards Milwaukee and Chicago, according to the high-resolution rapid refresh. Typically, the strongest winds tend to be found near the apex of that bow. So certainly looks like Milwaukee's under the gun and southern Michigan. The ARW, which was initialized from this morning, this is older data, but I've been very impressed with the ARW. And that's looking for pretty much the same sort of situation, maybe displaced a little bit further to the north. And so most of what we're seeing there is fallen closely in line with what SPC is forecasting, maybe a hair to the north of Milwaukee and more towards the central part of the state. So let's take a look at the big picture. This time of year, precipitable water is a major influence. And what we see here is 1.5 to 2 inch amounts through the southern states, and the animation is really the key. You can see a little bit of high pressure there across Mississippi and Alabama, producing a little bit of an offshore component, but also advecting some of that moisture into the western Gulf and into Texas itself. So that'll be the story in that part of the country, and also some incursions of dry air with that cold air advection coming out of Canada and, of course, into the northeastern U.S. So that's going to represent a front driving south, which tends to be quite common in August. We tend to see those stationary fronts pile up down to the south, and that can be a nucleus for thunderstorm formation along the length. Also, out to the west, some very high precipitable water will start back from the beginning. Arizona in a lull right now, only about an inch around Phoenix and pretty good 1.5 inches, but not seeing too much convection. But we see more moisture working up into that area as we get into the weekend, and some of that moisture makes it into Idaho, and they may see low 60s dew points by Saturday, with the possibility of some storms, and we're talking about the soaking type of thunderstorms, which should help put a damper on the wildfire threat. Then just a quick look through next week. Looks mild in many parts of the country, the Great Lakes, the Plains, and the Appalachians, so there'll be some dry air infiltrating those areas. The question is, when we get the return flow coming up, what's going to happen at that point? Doesn't look like much. Possibly another front coming south, interacting with that moisture, so it looks like maybe more precip possible for the Midwest. So we can visualize it this way. Bring this up to the current time. GFS breaking out storms in Wisconsin. There's that front coming south, and ahead of it the return flow along Interstate 35. And then going forward, that derecho moves into Ohio during the morning hours, and what remnants there are head into Maryland and Pennsylvania, and maybe some additional storms tomorrow as heating starts up in Ohio, and that frontal boundary will probably be right through that area. Probably something like that there. And there's that high pressure driving that front, northerly cold air advection back behind it. Again, we're looking at tomorrow afternoon, and down to the south there's the southerly flow coming up from Texas, and looks like maybe an offshore component. I don't know, kind of hard to tell there. I think there might be a little bit of troughing here, so 114, 116, yeah, probably something like that, just some weak onshore. So looks like maybe things are changing up in the Gulf a little bit. And going into the weekend, some evidence of a frontal boundary pushing south. Some storms where the moisture feed intersects that there in Missouri. A couple of MCSs moving into Arkansas over the weekend, places like Memphis and Nashville, and more MCSs developing as that front sinks south and interacts with that moisture. So East Texas, Louisiana, getting it Sunday into Monday. And then things should dry out except for the Gulf Coast region. Any big changes after that? No, not really. Another Pacific system sweeping eastward through the northern plains. Looks like some very deep tropical moisture coming up through the plains. And then going into the following weekend, not much of anything. Some cold air advection in the northern plains and deep tropical flow coming up from the Gulf. So hopefully that gives you a good introduction to what's happening today and a look at the forecast over the next week. We'll see you all again for the Friday video. That will be the last video in July 2021, because next week will be August. So we'll see you in a couple days. Take care and have a good one. Bye-bye.